So we come to Lamentations. Lamentations is, as you could probably well guess, is a fairly depressing book in some regard. It is traditionally attributed to Jeremiah, and your English Bibles, in fact, it will come right after Jeremiah, and that fits historically and also literarily. Some argue that the style is a little bit different, that Jeremiah is never cited as the author, but Jeremiah wouldn't have to be cited as the author in a book of poetry like this. These aren't psalms, if you will, and these are full blown laments, and so it's not necessary for an author to be cited. Either way, it's probably written, probably compiled at least shortly after the destruction of Jerusalem, 586 BC. It certainly does reflect someone who actually saw both the siege and the destruction of Jerusalem, and mourned the sight of it. Literary characteristics is primary is that Lamentations is an acrostic in chapters 1 through 4. So chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5 all contain 22 verses, which is the number of letters in the Hebrew alphabet, at least for at one count. Chapter 3 contains 66 verses. Those numbers applied 3 times. The outline is fairly straightforward. There are 5 passages. There's Jerusalem's lament, Jerusalem's angry God. Jerusalem, in fact, is slaughtered by her own God. This is an idea that would have been really shocking in the ancient world. It would have simply because the vast majority of the ancient world carried this sort of triangular worldview, to where you had the God up here, and then on both of these corners down here, you had land and people, and they were all interrelated and interdependent. In fact, the land needed the God, and the God needed the land, and the God needed the people, and the people needed the God, and the people needed the land, and the land needed the people, and so they were all interrelated. So for the God to attack, his own people, was quite astounding, and it was telling. It really did convey that this God, in some sense, transcended his people, was not interdependent upon them at all. Judah's lament and hope are bound up in and her utter ruin, or in chapters 3 and 4. In chapters 4, of course, you have this really brutal picture of women eating their children and things like that. Just really rough stuff. But then the book ends with some sense of hope, that just like back in 2 Samuel 7, David would be chastised by God but not put off completely, because he's not Saul, he's David. In the same way, Jerusalem is chastised and busted significantly by God, but not put off forever because of Jerusalem. It's a description, like I said earlier, of the aftermath of the destruction of Jerusalem, more than likely written by someone who was first-hand knowledge of it. Chapters 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 are almost belligerent in the way they talk about God. Why did you do this? Why? When are you going to fix this? Do you not see what's happening? These godless Babylonians are trouncing us. Why aren't you rising up and fighting on our behalf? There's certain things that are consistent with perhaps with previous wisdom literature, or wisdom and Lady Folly, for example. Cry out to men from in the square and in open places from the vantage point of the Temple of Jerusalem. The temple here, being clobbered at this point, demonstrates its call also out into open places and in the square for faithfulness and fidelity. Chapter 3 is a significant chapter, kind of a pivotal chapter. Chapter 3 confesses the knowledge of Israel's sin and confesses God's great faithfulness, which is really fascinating. It flies in the face of what's real. So the notion of the apparent and the real become a real issue in the wisdom literature, and what an issue in the writings at large. If you remember, we talked about this a little bit in the laments and the psalms, that though everything around looks not just bleak but devastatingly so. There is this almost insipid hope that's deep inside of the psalmist, or the of Jeremiah, perhaps, and within the bounds of this lament, he knows that he's not going to be cast off forever, and so this becomes a very pivotal sort of chapter. Well, that is all of Lamentations, and I will talk to you in just a few.